Welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast, where I help you view current issues through the lens of the ancient wisdom of Scripture. This week, bin Laden was trending on TikTok as Gen Z discovered his letter to America. Generations who actually lived through 9/11 were shocked to find that the infamous terrorist was not being condemned by our youngest generation, but rather having his views embraced. How could this possibly be rationalized, and what spiritual reality lies behind this trend? Marvel's latest big-budget blockbuster, The Marvels, struggled through the lowest opening weekend in the history of the MCU. For years, they could count on even their most mediocre characters churning out $500 million. Now they are losing close to the same amount on certain projects. Critics have pointed to the lackluster leading character, inherent sexism in moviegoers, poor scheduling, and marketing failures to explain this disaster. I actually think it may be far simpler than that, and I'll show you a contrasting Marvel project to make my point. Reading Rainbow star LaVar Burton recently attracted controversy at the National Book Awards by joking he may have to throw hands with any attenders who are part of the Moms for Liberty group. This got a massive applause from the crowd. So what crimes have the Moms for Liberty committed to make Geordi La Forge so angry? Is he justified in this extreme disdain for them? All that, and one look at the absolute circus acts that encompassed Congress in the last week. From a senator threatening to fight a witness in the middle of a hearing, to Kevin McCarthy allegedly shoulder checking his colleague outside the chambers, to George Santos facing a resolution to expel for lying about basically everything imaginable. How do we make sense of all of this drama, and what are the deeper issues causing this chaos? Let's find out together on episode 40 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. Episode 40. Yeah, man, a big milestone here. 40 episodes in. We've been keeping it consistent, and you guys have been showing up in force. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. If you're listening on an RSS feed, make your way over at some point to youtube.com/Clayton Tyner. Subscribe to the channel and help us build this. And if you want to support the podcast, it is starting to cost more and more money to keep this going and keep it growing. You can show your support at patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. That's patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. The link is in the description below. I want to thank Al Dotson, who came through supporting the podcast. He's always been an encouragement to me about the show, and now he has joined as one of the Patreons. By joining Patreon, you can get exclusive access to certain content, early access to some content. At a certain tier, you can join a live monthly Q&A where we all jump into a video call together and actually get to interact. Check all that out at patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. And without further ado, let's get to today's 3 points. Well, I think everyone who actually lived through September 11th, 2001 was pretty shocked, not just to hear that bin Laden was randomly trending on TikTok, but then to discover why exactly he was trending. And here are some of the influential TikTokers. This is a compilation I actually pulled from Twitter talking about just how intrigued they were, and some of them devastated, and some of them, their world will never be the same after reading bin Laden's famous letter to America.
This morning, I read Letter to America, which is Osama bin Laden's letter to America explaining why he attacked Americans. And I am ashamed to say that I not only have never read this letter, but I didn't even know this letter existed. Wow. It's wild, and everyone should read it. If you haven't read it yet, read it. However, be forewarned that this has left me very disillusioned, and I feel the same exact way I felt when I was deconstructing Christianity. I feel a little bit just confused, like I have entered into another timeline. What is this? And yeah, so go read it.
So I just read A Letter to America, and I will never look at life the same. I will never look at this country the same. I will never, please read it. And if you have read it, Let me know if you are also going through an existential crisis.
Okay, so there's 5 more minutes of this of people, number one, just being so dramatic. I will never see, my life will never ever be the same again.
Wow.
Except it will. I mean, you will just go out for sushi tonight. You'll wake up tomorrow morning. You'll scroll on TikTok for hours and hours of your day. You'll have the same friends. You're not going to leave the country. Like nothing's actually changed. You won't even remember this in a month. But why is this standing out to people so much? And a lot of people haven't read bin Laden's letter to America. And the parts that people are, I guess, having their mind blown is that bin Laden is detailing all of his complaints and concerns with America. And if you read it, it's a pretty long letter. No matter where you sit on the political spectrum, you can actually probably find at least one half of one sentence that you agree with. If you are more isolationist in your foreign policy views, you're going to agree with some of the first part of his letter. If you're a little more conservative in your social views, you're going to agree with parts of his letter. If you are on this new trend of decolonization, which is more of a left-leaning viewpoint, you're going to definitely agree with some parts of this letter. And what this is a manifesto for someone who killed 3,000 Americans, trying desperately to show why that was okay. And we get these kind of manifestos all the time. People leave them behind after they, or before they commit acts of mass violence. Mass shooters leave behind manifestos. Serial killers leave behind manifestos. And here's the reality. In most manifestos, they correctly identify some symptoms of things gone wrong. Most manifestos correctly identify some symptoms, and then they offer absolute poison as the cure. So if you read any random school shooter's manifesto, they're going to say some things in there, usually, that are true. Maybe, marginalized kids aren't treated well at their school. Maybe they're shown a little bit more leeway by certain teachers. Perhaps there are teachers who are not kind to students who are struggling. Perhaps there are inequalities within their school experience. They're going to point out things that are true. And so the question is, does that make everything they say true? And are we getting a fully rounded view of the situation from someone who is in a state of mind where they're willing to create some mass atrocity? I have to assume that all of the people on TikTok, and look, I read like NPR was like, this wasn't viral. People are like jumping to conclusions. It wasn't viral. It only reached like 14 million people. If 14 million people is not going viral, then I would love for my podcast to not go viral. 14 million people. That's a sizable, I think that's like a 25th of the United States. If my math is checking out, 350 million people, 14 million people, I think that's about 1/25th of the entire country. I have videos that get 7 views in a month. Okay. 14 million people is definitely going viral, and hundreds of people posting videos like this. And people began to try to suppress content. I have to assume they didn't read the second half of the letter. So the letter to America is broken down into, here's why we did this. Here's why we can rationalize flying jets into buildings and killing 3,000 people. But the second part of the video is, and here is what we want. Here are our demands. It literally says, as for the second question that we want to answer, what are we calling you to and what do we want from you? I have to believe that the people on TikTok did not read the second half of the letter. They just saw some things they kind of agree with, and then they moved on. So let's look at what they wanted out of this. This is from bin Laden. The first thing we are calling you to is Islam, the religion of the unification of God, of freedom from associating partners with him and rejection of this, of complete love of him, the exalted, of complete submission to his laws, and of the discarding of all the opinions, orders, theories, and religions which contradict the religion he sent down to Prophet Muhammad. It is to this religion that we call you, the seal of all the previous religions. It's the religion of the unification of God, sincerity, the best of manners, righteousness, mercy, honor, purity, and piety. It's the religion of showing kindness. It goes on to say that it is the religion of jihad, in the way of Allah, so that Allah's word and religion reign supreme. And it is the religion of unity and agreement on the obedience to Allah and total equality between all people without regarding their color, sex, or language. So the call, after all this, after him picking and pointing at all of his issues and concerns with the West, is what we're calling you to, first and foremost, is Islam. Now, I'm a Christian pastor, and so what I do is I get up and I call people to accept Christ. That's what I do every single week. However, what the West is founded on, and what I have sincere doubts the people who are embracing bin Laden's ideologies want, is a total loss of the freedom of religion and the freedom of association. If you don't know what jihad is, it is holy war. So he's not only saying, here's what we want. We want no religious freedom. We will do away with anything that is not Islam, and you will convert to Islam. And there at the end, he sneaks in, and we want the religion of jihad in the way of Allah, which means if you're not willing to convert, then we will kill you. So convert or die. Islam propagated very differently than Christianity. Christianity was under persecution. They were under the sword the entire time that they were spreading and going all throughout the world. And as a matter of fact, the more Christianity became oppressed and persecuted, the more that it grew. Islam converted with the sword. It was convert or die. It was propagation through holy war. That is what he is calling America to again. He goes on to say, we call you to be a people of manners, principles, honor, and purity. We know how much our culture loves purity culture from the Christian religion, right? How everybody loves that and embraces that. Nobody has a problem with that, right? Principles, honor, and purity, to reject the immoral acts of fornication, that's sex outside of marriage, homosexuality, intoxicants, that's any kind of drinking or smoking or drugs, gambling, and trading with interest. We call you to all of this, that you may be freed from that which you have become caught up in, that you may be freed from the deceptive lies that you are a great nation, that your leaders spread amongst you to conceal from you the despicable state to which you have reached. It is saddening to tell you, you're the worst civilization witnessed by the history of mankind. You are the nation who, rather than ruling by the Sharia law of Allah and its constitution, chose to invent your own laws as you will and desire. So it goes on and on like this. That's enough of a sample for you to understand what bin Laden is calling the West to. So here's the problems, and the problems are why we had to kill 3,000 of your innocent civilians, not your soldiers in a war, but your civilians in a terrorist attack. And if we have our way, then we're going to take away almost all of your freedoms, and you are going to live in a theocratic government where you are ruled by Sharia law, and we will exercise jihad in order to assure that everyone converts to Islam. So is that what rocked your world? Is that what made you get on TikTok and talk about how you really need to, man, bin Laden has some really good points in here, you know? It's a manifesto. It's like, yeah, man, you were bullied in school, and that's terrible. And the system wasn't fair, and that's terrible. And you reached out for help and they didn't help you, and something should be done about that. And so the answer is to gun down dozens of your innocent classmates. Doesn't seem like the symptoms match the cure. And it also highlights a big difference between the Christian view and the Islamic view. And the Christian view is not that we are supposed to rule as theocrats, as people who govern a nation under the law of God. That's coming. When Jesus returns, that is what will happen. But Jesus is the king. We are not the kings, which is why Christianity can coexist anywhere on the world. It can exist in a democracy. It can exist under socialist pressure. It can exist in countries where they outlaw Christianity, and Christianity goes underground and continues to grow as the light of the world. So he's saying, you guys, you've made up your own laws instead of following the law of God. And it's like the law of God in scripture is written on the hearts of people. And we are held responsible first and foremost to how we live out our faith. And we have a personal relationship with our God mediated through Jesus Christ, connected by the Holy Spirit inside of us. And this is a very, very different view. Bin Laden's answer to the licentiousness, that he sees in the West is legalism, is we are going to hammer this down with law. We are going to make it where you cannot do these things. As a Christian, yeah, I mean, we also preach against sexual immorality. We also preach against the abuse of, intoxicants and all kinds of things like that. We also warn against being swept up in gambling. We warn of those things too. However, we're warned very carefully not to engage in legalism, not to go back to a time where we're just trying to pressure everyone into behavioral compliance with the law. Instead, calling people to live out of the Spirit through love. We're not called to licentiousness, and we're not called to legalism. In 2 Peter, he's writing about licentiousness. He says these false teachers are like unthinking animals, creatures of instinct, born to be caught and destroyed. They scoff at things they do not understand, and like animals, they will be destroyed. Their destruction is their reward for the harm they've done. They love to indulge in evil pleasures in broad daylight. They are a disgrace and a stain among you. They delight in deception, even as they eat with you in your fellowship meals. They commit adultery with their eyes, and their desire for sin is never satisfied. They lure unstable people into sin, and they are well trained in greed. They live under God's curse. They have wandered off the right road and followed the footsteps of Balaam, son of Beor, who loved to earn money by doing wrong. But Balaam was stopped from his mad course when his donkey rebuked him with a human voice. So look, you can just go to almost anywhere in the Old or New Testament and see that God is not okay with licentiousness. And as we've talked about on the podcast, when you read the founding fathers, their idea of liberty was not license. Liberty was not just giving you the right to engage in any kind of immoral acts that your mind can possibly imagine. Liberty requires responsibility. It requires maintaining yourself in a decent society. But the answer also isn't going all of the way over to legalism. And legalism can be just as deadly. And this is what Peter is writing about in 1st and 2nd Peter, is that the answer to righteousness isn't found in license, and it's also not found in legalism. Here's what Paul wrote to the Galatians. He said, but those who depend on the law to make them right with God are under his curse. For the scriptures say, cursed is everyone who does not observe and obey all the commands that are written in God's book of the law. So it is clear that no one can be made right with God by trying to keep the law. For the scripture says, it is through faith that a righteous person has life. This way of faith is very different from the way of the law, which says it is through obeying the law that a person has life. And so here's really the heart of the Christian belief and the liberty that we are given through the Spirit. But Christ has rescued us from the curse pronounced by the law. When he was hung on the cross, he took upon himself the curse for our wrongdoing. For it is written in the scriptures, cursed is everyone who is hung on a tree. Through Christ Jesus, God has blessed the Gentiles with the same blessing he promised to Abraham, so that we who are believers might receive the promise, his Holy Spirit, through faith. The answer to our culture's problem is not authoritarian legalism or nihilistic license. The answer is true Christian liberty. We have a lot of problems in our culture today. And people read the first half, I guess, of bin Laden's letter to America, and he's pointing out all of these problems. And it's like, man, he was really onto something, But his answer is to go into the strictest form of legalism imaginable, Sharia law, jihad, right? That's not the answer. And the answer certainly isn't how we are functioning as a Western culture, which is nihilistic license. As long as I have consent, I can do anything I can possibly imagine. The real answer we're looking for is true Christian liberty. And I think what a lot of people are attracted to in bin Laden's letter is a conviction. And it is a conviction from someone who believes in an absolute truth. Now, I absolutely believe that is not true absolute truth. I do believe that truth is found in Jesus. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. And following Jesus certainly doesn't lead you into nihilistic license where you live a licentious life, but it also doesn't lead you into authoritarian legalism. It brings you right into the center of true Christian liberty, and that is where human beings actually flourish. Last weekend, The Marvels opened, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe's new big budget blockbuster. It stars Brie Larson as Captain Marvel, who's been in the MCU for some time. It also brought in two other characters who were introduced in Disney Plus shows. And this movie, like a lot of people thought it would, it absolutely bombed.
Wow.
It was the lowest opening ever. And people are trying to figure out exactly why this happened. And apparently there were a lot of problems on set. So maybe that was it. Maybe it was the screenwriter. Maybe it was the producer. A lot of people are saying, this is sexism, obviously. Men are just too insecure to like embrace a female lead character, although the numbers were literally so low that men and women just didn't go to it. So I'm not sure that that's fully true. Is it misogyny? Is it poor marketing? There was an actor strike, so they didn't get to do the same amount of press that they normally do, even though there was like $100 million+ marketing budget, and you couldn't go anywhere without seeing an advertisement for this new movie, The Marvels. What was the actual problem? And I think it was none of those things. I think there's a way, way simpler reason that this movie just simply couldn't get off the ground. And it brings it down to a more base level of understanding what you're doing in the broader sense of running an organization. And to me, this is an issue, not even necessarily of content, although I have heard a lot of people make very nuanced critique of the movie, just not really going anywhere and having a lot of plot holes. Not necessarily some social ill, while there certainly is. There are things like misogyny, and there are people who just aren't going to embrace a female character lead. I think it is so much simpler than that. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people are kind of poking fun at the character who plays Miss Marvel, because she basically said, this is Bob Iger's problem. This is the CEO of Disney's problem. And it might surprise you to find out, I agree. In the New York Post, it says, Marvel star says huge box office flop is Bob Iger's problem. Let's go down and read. It says that it had a catastrophic 78% drop at the box office from the first week into the second. And having taken in just $116 million worldwide so far, it's one of the biggest disasters in the 15-year history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, star Iman Vellani, who plays Kamala Khan, said that the failure is not her problem, it's Disney CEO Bob Iger's. I don't want to focus on something that's not even in my control, because what's the point? Vellani, 21, said in an interview. That's for Bob Iger. The Disney-produced film, which was made on a hefty $200 million budget, currently holds a 62% on Rotten Tomatoes, making it the third lowest MCU film. Here we go. It says the Marvels stars Iman Vellani, Brie Larson, and Teyana Paris. They could wind up the biggest box office bomb of all time. In a 0-star review, the Post called the movie, starring Brie Larson, and said it was a sad study of the downfall of America's favorite screen franchise. ABC News' Peter Travers echoed those sentiments, writing, the MCU, once the spawner of glories, is stuck in a rut. The time for a rethink is now. Vellani went on to say, the box office has nothing to do with me. Despite the film's failure, she said, I'm happy with the finished product, and the people that I care about enjoyed the film. It's a fun movie, and I'm just so happy I can share it with people. The Marvels could end up with a domestic box office gross of less than $100 million, the franchise worst ever. So this is a massive failure on Marvel's part, and Vellani, who plays Miss Marvel, is like, not my problem. I showed up, I did my thing, I acted, I learned my lines, I ran around, and every review I've heard said she is like the brightest part of the movie, that she really does do a good job. And so what is happening? If it's not sexism, if it's not the marketing budget, what is the actual problem? The real issue for Marvel is quite simple. They intended to build an ecosystem, but instead they built a funnel. They intended to build an ecosystem, and instead they built a funnel. So what the heck does that even mean? An ecosystem and a funnel. With the introduction of Disney Plus, which is Disney's streaming service, they started building out the Marvel Cinematic Universe, not just on the big screen, but for the first time in television shows, in these series that would have, 6 episodes or 8 episodes, 45 minutes a piece. All of a sudden, there was this massive amount of content. And the intention for that was to build out the cinematic universe into an ecosystem that not only existed on the big screen, but also had content that was consumed by users at home. And this ecosystem was supposed to take what was so unique about the MCU, which is this idea that, over their first 10 years, they took 30 films and told one giant story, and all of the characters connected, and there was backstories and sub-stories and subplots and plots within plots and relationships within relationships. And man, everyone followed this. It spawned a whole bunch of YouTube channels like New Rock Stars and people on Screen Rant who do an amazing job showing you all the Easter eggs and connectivity, and nerds like me who take it all in and are just like, wow. But it didn't create an ecosystem because, number one, and everyone's talked about this, there was just such a dilution with the amount of content coming at you. Instead, what it created was more of a funnel. And there are all kinds of companies that build funnels, and they build them on purpose. I'm a pastor of a local church, and we are creating a community of people, but we are trying to move people along a path that you would call theologically sanctification, which is learning more and growing more and challenging yourself more to become more and more like Jesus over time. And this could change someday. But in the church world right now, for most churches, certainly for our local church, we have a funnel. And the top of the funnel is Sunday service. That is when the absolute most people come. And so we have like 1,000 people who would call Metachurch their home, and a little over 1,000 people on any given Sunday who would come. They don't all come at the same time, but about 1,000 plus people. And that's the top of our funnel. And once they're there, now we're inviting them in, get into a life team, and they get into a life team, but that's a smaller percentage of the total. And over time, we hope that that percentage grows and grows to where like 80+% of our people are in a life team. And then, we call people to serve on our team so that we can put on our Sunday services, and that's less people. And then we call people, now we've started a program that's a really intense semester-based program. We can currently only hold like about 50 people. We're hoping to expand that to 100. That's 1/10 of, the people who could come on Sunday. And so the funnel gets smaller and smaller, right? Other companies do this. They try to get you in with whatever their big product is and then add other products, but they know that that's going to diminish as time goes on. The other thing you build is an ecosystem. And a good example of that is Apple. Apple built a great ecosystem. And there's this great story of when Steve Jobs, he was fired for just being a complete jerk. And then they bombed it. So they brought him back on, and he kind of learned his lesson. And they had 90 something products, and they didn't have anything to do with each other. And so famously, he went up on the board and he made 4 quadrants, and he said, we're going to do 4 things. And all 4 of these things are going to speak to each other. So Apple's an ecosystem because once you have a MacBook, if you're still carrying an Android because you hate yourself, wow, then all of a sudden you realize you can copy something on an iPhone and click paste on your MacBook, and it pastes it there. And it's like they speak to each other. And you can turn on your front-facing camera on your phone, and it show up on your Mac. There's an ecosystem there. And so if you get one Apple product, you're likely to get more and more and more. And why not get an iPad? And why not get the AirPods, because you just put them in and it speaks to everything. And there's probably some Apple haters out there, and that's fine. But also, stop the cap. That's an ecosystem. And Marvel wanted to create an ecosystem, where it's like you go to the movies, and then you go back home and you rewatch the episodes, and you're just falling more in love with these characters, and you're getting a deep backstory on Scarlet Witch because you've got 6 episodes and you're seeing her grief, and then when she's on the big screen and Doctor Strange, you're going to feel even more connected. And yes, there are the nerds like me who are going to watch it all and appreciate it all. But what they've actually created is a funnel. And I think one of the very simple reasons that the Marvels has done so poorly is because they turned a funnel upside down. Miss Marvel, Disney Plus show, much smaller audience. You had to watch 6 or 7 or 8 episodes to even know who she is. Photon, dude, I'm a huge Marvel fan. I can't even think of her real name. Monica Rambeau. I can't think of it.
Stop the cap.
She was like the tertiary character in a Disney Plus show. She's like beyond the funnel. She didn't even make the funnel. There was Scarlet Witch, and there was Vision, and there was their kids, and there was the CIA agent. She was in like 3 of the episodes. Nobody knows who she is, and nobody cares who she is. And even though Captain Marvel did have her own movie, it didn't do well in the ratings. And since then, they have not kept her relevant. She was in Endgame for like 5 seconds. She's been in some post-credit scenes that nobody cared about. So even she is not like a big funnel. And let's do the opposite, because Loki just came out and it was a great show and it's like critically acclaimed and everyone loved it. And all the MCU nerds were super thrilled about it, right? But it's the opposite. Loki came from the big part of the funnel. I mean, he's been in multiple movies. He's been the big bad of the very first Avengers, right? You can't get bigger than that. And he was in all the Thor movies, and he was in Ragnarok, and he was in Endgame. And, so we have this huge funnel that filters people down to Loki's Disney Plus show, the small side of the funnel. And I don't think they understand that, and they haven't created what they think they've created. They wanted an ecosystem, but they built a funnel. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says, everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. It's important to always address reality. And the reality is what they did with Disney Plus was not what they thought it was going to be. And it's creating problems for them. It's creating a scenario where to even appreciate the big budget blockbuster movies in the theaters, you have to be the level of Marvel nerd that's going to take in hours and hours and hours and hours of Disney Plus content. And most people think Disney Plus is something to put their kids in front of so they can get 45 minutes of silence in their life. They don't think that it's something that they have to do homework on to be able to even understand what's going on in a movie that your family of 5 just paid $78 to go to because everything is so ridiculously expensive. I also think that there is a parallel in scripture. In the Gospels, Matthew chapter 22, it says the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, so they met together to question Jesus again. They're trying to trap him. And one of them, an expert in the religious law, tried to trap him with this question: Teacher, what is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? What are they asking? They're like, hey, lay out the funnel for us. Tell us the most important law, and then we'll kind of be able to filter that down and prioritize. But Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And a second is equally important: love your neighbor and yourself. And then he says this: the entire funnel, the entire law, and all the demands of the prophets, all of them are based on just these two things. In other words, if you get those two things right, it creates an ecosystem of righteousness in your life. If you don't address reality, you cannot fix your reality. If Disney continues to believe that they have created an ecosystem, they will continue being plagued by the bottleneck of an upside down funnel. LaVar Burton, who is famous for the host of Reading Rainbow, Butterfly in the Sky. I loved Reading Rainbow as a kid. He was also Geordi La Forge on Star Trek. If you don't remember him, he had the world's absolute coolest glasses. And he just created some controversy at the National Book Awards for going off on a group called the Moms of Liberty. Let's take a look at LaVar Burton in a light that maybe you haven't seen him before.
Welcome, everyone, to the 74th National Book Awards. Thanks. Before we get going, are there any Moms for Liberty in the house? Moms for Liberty? No? Good. Then hands will not need to be thrown tonight.
Okay, so if you're unfamiliar with that, throwing hands is hitting people. Yeah, so LaVar Burton, famous, of course, for showing up in like 3 episodes of Community. LaVar Burton, of course, famous for hosting awards. The Reading Rainbow guy is threatening to punch moms. So wow. That's interesting anyway. So who are the Moms for Liberty, and what have they done to absolutely piss off LaVar Burton? The Moms for Liberty, they seek to keep pornographic content and sexual indoctrination out of school libraries. That's what they do. They do a lot more than that. They are pushing for the rights of parents. This was birthed, I believe, out of pandemic, where all of our kids were home and they were Zoom calling with their teachers, and parents for the first time became aware of some of what's being taught in classrooms. And it was definitely a call to parental activism. I want to look at the Moms for Liberty parent pledge. I really scoured their website to try to see what they possibly could have done that made Geordi La Forge want to absolutely vaporize them. And here, after reading their website, I think their parent pledge, this is what they want other parents to do. It really summarizes the work that they're hoping to do in the world. Here's the parent pledge. I pledge to honor the fundamental rights of parents, including but not limited to the right to direct the education, medical care, and moral upbringing of their children. I pledge to advance policies that strengthen parental involvement in decision-making, increase transparency, defend against government overreach, and secure parental rights at all levels of government. That is the heart of what the Moms for Liberty are trying to do. And because of that, Reading Rainbow wants to throw hands. So the world is getting interesting. And that's what Moms for Liberty is actually trying to do. Now, to have a nuanced view on this, let me say this. I grew up in church, and now I'm a Christian pastor. And growing up in church, sometimes you find people who have the best intentions in the world. I mean, they love the Lord, they love people, but they are lacking maybe in social skill.
Wow.
They are lacking in tact.
Wow.
They are lacking in experience with human beings who aren't just exactly like them.
Wow.
And so you get them in the wrong environment, or you get them really excited, and with really good intentions, they come across really poorly. That can happen to literally anyone. And what we shouldn't do is we shouldn't judge someone's entire movement off of like one or two video clips we can find of their worst representatives. And that's typically what we do. A huge problem in culture today is arguing based off of the anomalies. We should try to understand what people's actual stances are and not based off of their one or two worst ever representatives, right? Typically, the Moms for Liberty are doing unbelievable work in trying to get parents to parent well and to take up the responsibility and not to see the government and the school system, which is part of the government if you're in public school, as the babysitters and indoctrinators and pretty much the parents of their kids, and then you just feed them at night and put them to bed. And that is a good thing. What they're being accused of is they're a huge part of the conversation around book banning. And book banning, of course, has a very negative connotation historically. And the thing that's obviously dangerous about book banning is then, depending on who is in charge at any given time, they can ban the books that seem to oppose them, which means if there is someone who is very secular and antagonistic towards your specific faith, they could hypothetically try to ban all of the books that undergird your faith. And so that's not good. So book banning is like a really serious charge, and that's what's being charged against the Mothers for Liberty. However, book banning in this case is a misnomer used to draw support against parents protecting their children. The idea that book banning and ensuring that the school library does not have pornographic material in it is somehow the same thing is absolutely wild.
Stop the cap.
It's obvious those are two different things. Like, to anyone who is even trying to slightly be fair, that's obvious. So what's LaVar Burton's real problem? Well, I don't know the guy. And so I'm going to assume he hasn't done his research. He really does believe they're out there trying to ban books. He loves books. He made his money off of reading books. He's the Reading Rainbow guy, You can go twice as high. You know what I never know? I never know if it says it's in a book, so take a look, or take a look, it's in a book. Comment below. That's the big controversy really surrounding all of this. What does the song actually say?
Wow.
I'm going to assume he's just heard these are radical people trying to ban books everywhere, not that these are concerned parents who are finding pornographic material and sexual indoctrination in the libraries of their schools and protesting to get that taken out, because I think it just seems obvious that shouldn't be in a library if it is. And if you saw this accurately, what you would see is that the Moms for Liberty aren't against you if you are pro-reading and pro-education, that they're actually helping you. They're creating an environment where parents can send their kids into a library confident that whatever they pull out of that library is going to be healthy and wholesome for them. Protecting children is important. And even if groups aren't doing it exactly how you want it to be done or exactly perfectly, we should be thankful that there are people out there with the primary objective of protecting kids. You know, Jesus is like known as the guy of love, and every once in a while he flips over some tables and we just kind of ignore that. Here's how Jesus feels about kids. Says, if you cause, this is a quote from Jesus, if you cause one of these little ones who trusts in me to fall into sin, it would be better for you to have a large millstone tied around your neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Shots fired. That's by Jesus, okay? That's how Jesus feels about leading a kid into sin, about stocking the shelves of your library with obscene pornographic material. So if that's not happening, then don't worry about it, because the Moms for Liberty won't have anything to find. If it is happening, they're going to find it, and we should be grateful for that. As believers, Paul told the Ephesians, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them, which means that if there are unfruitful works of darkness, and I think leading a kid into sin and temptation, according to Jesus, would definitely fall into that category, then we actually have a biblical injunction to expose those things. And the real simple truth is, if we cannot protect children in our society, we have truly fallen past the point of repair. And everyone kind of has this wondering of like, when exactly is the West and the United States going to fall past the point of return? And I'm an optimist. I don't think we're there. I don't think we're close. I think there is so much hope, and I have so much hope for our culture and for our country. As bad as things can seem right now, I'm going to stay optimistic. But if we cannot protect children, if that is no longer the consensus, that is a really, really bad sign about where we're at. And now let's go to our last section. I want to remind you that I have a Patreon for the Clayton Tyner podcast. It is www.patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. That's patreon.com/Clayton, Tyner. Check it out at the link in the description below. You can help support this podcast, cover the cost of what it's taking to actually run the podcast week to week, and help it build as we continue to grow. And in exchange, you can get access to exclusive content, early access to some videos. You can even be a part of monthly live Q&As, where instead of me just talking to you through a screen, we all jump into a video call together and get to interact with each other. So again, that's patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. This last week in Congress, it was an absolute circus. It was a clown show. The craziest things keep happening. You know, across this year, we have people pulling fire alarms, and we have, you know, just all of the madness going on. The majority of this week was on the Republican side of the political spectrum, and just the wildest things. We're going to look at some of these clips. This is Senator Mullen, I believe, out of Tennessee. This is during a hearing. So they have a witness on the stand, and apparently the witness has been talking some trash about Senator Mullen online, and he does not take kindly to it.
But after you left here, you got pretty excited about the keyboard. In fact, you tweeted at me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And let me read what the last one said. It said, greedy CEO who pretends like he's self-made. Pretends like he's self-made. What a clown. Fraud. Always has been, always will be. Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me.
Okay, so this is about to get so good, but let me just say, so sensitive. Okay, I am like a tiny channel on YouTube. Okay, you know, we've got 800 subscribers right in our site, which is awesome, because that basically means we're the fastest growing podcast on YouTube, called the Clayton Tyner Podcast. But I have already, in just my 40 episodes, gotten the craziest, meanest, rudest comments toward me. You just can't be sensitive like this, right? And so here's where it really goes off the rails.
Place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here. You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
Oh, stop it.
Revolutionary Republic.
No, sit down.
Eric,
Sit down. Okay. You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
Okay, so this was thought out. He came in with receipts. You know, oh, you called me this and you called me that and you really hurt my feelings. And so in the tweets, the guy on the witness stand who works for the unions, he's like, anytime, any place, you know where to find me, bro. Like, we can do this. All that we need in here is LaVar Burton, right? We just need a cage match, everyone throwing hands. And he's like, this is a time and place. And here's what I love, dude, is he's being so hardcore. And then when he challenges him, he says in his Southern drawl, well, then why don't you just stand your butt up? So childish. And if it couldn't get worse, then the guy says back, well, why don't you stand your butt up, right? Oh my goodness. The only thing that could have made this more magical if he would have been like, yeah, just get your little tush up right now, you know? Number one, when C-SPAN saw this, they had to have been like, yes. Like for the first time in 50 years as a company, something exciting is happening. If things like this happened all of the time, I'd pay more attention, you know? This is so wild. It's obviously so unbelievably immature, and it's just one of the things that happened. The other thing is, allegedly, Representative Tim Burchett said that Kevin McCarthy, who's been in the news a lot lately, specifically for losing the House speakership, came out of the chambers and like shoulder checked him and elbowed him in the kidney. This is the second wild circus act from this week.
Explain to us what happened with you and Kevin McCarthy.
Well, I was doing an interview with Claudia from NPR, a lovely lady, and when she was asking me a question, and at that time I got elbowed in the back, and it kind of caught me off guard because it was a clean shot to the kidneys, and I turned back, and there was Kevin, and
okay, now Kevin McCarthy completely denies this. Here we go.
The reporter was interviewing Burchett or something. I guess her shoulders hit because Burchett runs up to me after. I didn't know what he was talking about. So the reporter's asking me. I did not run and hit the guy. I did not kidney punch him. I did not shoot anything like that.
You didn't shoot.
No. We're walking through. You're at HC5, right? You guys line up along the way there. It was Bruce Wester and I walking out. He must have been interviewing someone. I didn't know it was him or something. I guess our elbows hit as I walked by.
I mean, just absolutely like kindergartners who are telling the teacher on each other. NPR is on Burchett's side, you know. He's saying, no, the lady's like, I saw it, and he just clearly wound up and he hit him. And Kevin's like, you guys know how it is. You all line up. I mean, I guess I hit him, but I don't know how hard I hit him. And I do lift weights, you know. So, I mean, it might have hurt him a little bit, but I definitely didn't mean to do it. And then Kevin McCarthy's arch enemy draws up a resolution to have him like punished or something because of all of this crazy behavior. And on top of all of that, George Santos, who is best known for lying about everything imaginable, now has an article to expel him from Congress. And I couldn't even find an actual video that does justice to just how wild this guy is. So we're going to watch this instead.
Hi, George. Yeah, this has not been a good week for you. The House Ethics Committee released a scathing report about you.
Okay.
It said that you spent campaign funds on OnlyFans.
You did.
On playing roulette.
You let.
Shopping at Hermes.
You're the mez.
George.
Okay, so yeah, that's ridiculous. And maybe you think it's silly to show SNL. It's literally not any sillier than what's actually going on with George Santos. He's this wild character who has just been abusing donor money. He's been lying about everything imaginable from his background, and he probably will get expelled from Congress if he hasn't been already. And so what is going on? And the question is, how are so many of our politicians so immature? And I had to cut this down because there were a few other things, like a congressperson calling another congressperson a smurf because they were short and wearing a blue suit. Wild. How are so many of our politicians so immature? And really, I think like everyone in the American public feels like we need a better level of leader in Congress. And we're at the point now where the well is so poisoned that there's really no normal people who would even dream of signing up to go and be a part of this. And like all things, this lack of integrity, this lack of maturity, this lack of righteousness, you would want your people who represent you to actually represent you well and to be able to make you proud for them to be your representative. And they're just not. They're immature and they're silly and they're largely ineffective. So how did this happen? The book of Proverbs, the book of wisdom in scripture, Proverbs 15:33 says, wisdom's instruction is to fear the Lord, and humility comes before honor. Humility comes before honor. Interestingly, in Proverbs 18, it says, before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. It's that same exact line repeated by Solomon, who wrote the Proverbs, the wisest king to ever live. Humility comes before honor. And we are not a culture of humility in our leadership. In a culture that seeks to be an influencer over actually having real influence, pride becomes more valuable than humility. Pride is like a top commodity today. Just the elevation of yourself and thinking highly of yourself. If you're wanting to actually have real influence, humility comes before honor. If you're wanting to be an influencer, which increasingly is what our political class wants to be, not have real influence, not make a real difference, not have real honor, but to be an influencer. To have an article that pops, to have a video go viral, to have your moment where you've already planned that you are going to invite a witness in a Senate hearing to physically fight you. It's just ridiculous to throw hands, like we saw earlier in the podcast. In a culture that seeks to be an influencer over having real influence, pride becomes more valuable than humility. I want to look at another story from the Old Testament. This is the story of Jacob and Esau. It says, once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field exhausted, and he said to Jacob, let me eat some of the red stuff, this stew, because I'm exhausted. And that is why he was also named Edom. And Jacob replied, first, sell me your birthright. Look, said Esau, I'm about to die, so what good is a birthright to me? Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore to Jacob and sold his birthright to him. And Jacob gave him bread and lentil stew, and he ate, drank, got up, and went away. And so Esau despised his birthright. Esau was the firstborn son. And in the Jewish culture, the firstborn son gets a double portion of inheritance. He is literally giving up everything. I mean, Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob and Esau, and Isaac was very wealthy because Abraham was very wealthy. A double portion, which goes to the oldest brother. And it's not just about what you get, it's the authority that comes with your birthright as the firstborn. And he sells his birthright, the most valuable thing he has, for a bowl of beans. It's just this instant gratification mindset. And that is what our leaders have. In a culture of immediate gratification, politicians struggle to live with the end in mind. They're not looking ahead. They're not thinking about how their decisions today affect their constituents a year from now, or 10 years from now, or certainly not 100 years from now. They're thinking about, what can I do right now? How can I get away with this right now? What is a little schoolyard tussle outside of the House chambers? What does it get you? What does it buy you? How does it help? To not just go over if you're McCarthy and shake a hand and go, if I hit you, totally my bad. Like a mature person would do, a person who has humility, and humility comes before honor. But instead, we're a culture of immediate gratification. If I don't make the news today, if my video doesn't go viral today, if I don't get attention today. And so if we're only concerned about today, we will be positioned to make devastating decisions in the future. We'll look at one more reason that I think we're really struggling with our leadership class. This is the story of the Tower of Babel. It said the whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. And as people migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. And they said to each other, come, let's make oven-fired bricks. They used brick for stone and asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. And let's make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered throughout the earth. Otherwise, we will be scattered throughout the earth. A lot of people are confused about what the sin of the Tower of Babel actually was. And yes, it was rooted in pride, but the direct disobedience is that God had given man as the image bearers of the divine creative mandate to fill the earth, rule the earth, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Their exact directions were to scatter throughout the earth. And the reason they build the tower specifically is if we don't build this, we're going to have to be scattered. In other words, if we don't build this, we're going to have to obey God. And so they are self-interested. We like this valley. We're tired of moving around. We're tired of traveling. We can just take this into our own hands. In a culture of self-interest, politicians fail to do their primary job of representing the people. The people in the Tower of Babel fail to do their job of representing God on the earth by following the creative mandate. And this is why God comes and confuses their language and spreads them throughout the earth. He forces them into compliance with what he had asked them to do in the beginning. And you're either going to learn your lesson the easy way or you're going to learn it the hard way. That's just how life works. We have a culture in our leadership where they want to be an influencer more than having influence, where they want immediate gratification in place of having long-term success. And we have politicians who are self-interested to the detriment of the people who they are supposed to be representing. We need people who go back to humility, because it is humility that comes before honor. I want to thank you for hanging out for episode 40 of the podcast. The podcast continues to grow. We continue to reach more people and new people. I want to remind you to subscribe. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on audio platform only, come over to youtube.com/Clayton Tyner and subscribe there. Help us build this channel. Also, if you want to help cover the cost to keep this going and keep it growing, really for the cost of like a Starbucks drink per month, you can go to patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. That's Tyner. We have a couple tiers that you can sign up. You can get bonus exclusive content. You can get early access to some content, and you can do a live Q&A where we actually get to hang out and talk. I will see you next week on episode 41.